Welcome to session 2 of the systems view of life, predicting the future, but perhaps not in quite the way you would expect. This session is about a number of foundational concepts of life. It spans how life makes the world predictable, and it ends with bureaucracy and friendship. Topics include open and closed systems, agency, stability versus resilience, what is behavior, life, motivation, the difference between coping and co-creation, and key concepts of politics, authority, freedom, power, things like that. But we start with the question, why do we want to predict the future? And the answer is, of course, quite what you would expect. It is avoiding problematic futures. So let's go to an example. Here we have a field on the horizontal axis we have time, and here we have place, and the game is as such that an agent can either remain in the same place or move up and down one place. And in this case, if it goes down in the next situation, it will die because of whatever reason. But if it remains or goes up a bit, it has a chance for a next step to make. So it is cheating death. And here we are looking one time step ahead. So let's see what happens. It goes one step ahead, doesn't matter so much where it goes to. Here all kinds of opportunities, two opportunities, one opportunity to go to, and here all of a sudden it has no opportunities anymore. And therefore it moves or it dies at the place. So let's play this game now with two time steps looking ahead. And now we see that it can make a better decision. And here it can see that it should go to this place, and then to here, and there, and eventually there. And so by looking 2 steps ahead, it is able to avoid a trap. So that is the importance of prediction. The further you can look ahead, the better you are able to plan your strategies. In this field here, there are a number of different situations. So for example, here in the beginning, it gets more and more options, the agent. Here, the options gradually reduce until there is only one option left here, this is then a dangerous situation. And so it has to be here in order not to die. So this is a complex, more complex behavioral decision problem. So let's connect that to the core cognition. And so if you look at the situation now, in a high complexity situation, some situations lead to your death, and another situation leads to a potential further step and a further step. So here it is easy to make mistakes. If we go to the other side here, there it's getting easier and easier, because here you have a number of states to be in, and here it doesn't matter at all. So this is a low complexity state in the sense of that it is not very difficult to decide on your behavior. Here it is more difficult, or it is difficult to decide on your behavior. This is a situation here in which you have many options, and especially many new options. And in this situation, you only have few options, and the options will either decrease or remain the same. So this is a situation which you can be curious to watch, and this is a situation where you have to be really careful with the limited options that you have. And this can all connected to something that Berlin Franklin said: by failing to prepare, you are preparing to fail. So the key point is that you always have to prepare, and you prepare by predicting possible futures. And you don't know which future you will end up, but the more possible futures you prepare for, the easier it is to negotiate whatever the future brings you. So one question that we might ask is, how did life make the world predictable? It's probably not a question that you have thought about before, but it's an important and deep question. And let's connect that to an active cognition in general. So the key point of an active cognition is all cognition arises through and from interactions with the world. So through those interactions with the world, we learn about the world, and when we learn, we are able to predict the future situation better, and therefore to be ready for that future. So key points of core cognition are open and closed systems, agency, sustainability, and life, and we will address these four topics today. A little bit self-actualization, adequacy and comfort zones, but mainly these topics. So, open and closed systems. Let's first go to the question, what is a system? And a system is actually something fairly straightforward. A system has characteristic dynamics due to stronger internal than external interconnections. So basically, a system is something that has stronger internal than external connections, and because of that, it does something characteristic. So it makes sense to define it. If it wouldn't have any characteristic properties, it wouldn't make sense to define it as a system of any sort, because you wouldn't recognize it from just random behavior. So we need both aspects. So here we have a little bit complicated picture of a system in context. So this is the system, and it has clearly a lot of strong internal connections, and it has a number of weaker external connections. And these are all subsystems of the system, so parts that make it work. And the parts that make it work are also outside of the system, in the environment of the system. This environment, the brown part, is in some sense influenced by the system. And this part here is hardly or not at all influenced by the system. So this might be a hurricane, for example. So this is the hurricane, and the hurricane leaves a track of all kinds of trees being fallen, and etc., and debris everywhere. Well, this part is hardly involved. Yeah, so the system, the hurricane, for example, can be defined as such because it actually maintains itself for a while. And it won't persist forever, typically. Even a rock, it's also a system with strong internal relationships. It doesn't do so much, and for that reason, it remains a long time a system, but eventually through weathering or all kinds of other slow processes, it will disappear and become sand or dust or whatever. So let's look to system properties. Well, for any system to make sense, it must persist for some time. It either changes slowly or it has stabilizing dynamics, and the stabilizing dynamics is typically something like this. If you move it a little bit in this direction, it will fall back and then eventually end up in the middle again. So this is clearly a stable system. If I would have turned around the whole thing, then it would be an unstable system, and therefore it would disappear or break down or whatever. And the second part is that it has characteristic properties or characteristic dynamics. This defines the class of or type of the system. Yeah, and if you have knowledge about the system, you can actually predict its dynamics. And because it has characteristic properties and dynamics, it can be recognized from these properties and the dynamics that you can observe. So this is the reason why it makes sense to actually define a system as a system. What we have two broad groups of systems. We have closed systems that are of which we assume that the context can be discounted, or you can deal with the context via an input-output relation. So via the context, something gets in, and then the system does something, and it response in something predictable. With an open system, that is not possible. An open system is just part of the whole world. It has stronger internal connections, but it is not protected from the outside world. And typically all open systems, there is mass going through and energy passing through, and it's in a constant balance with its environment. It is not protected in any way from its environment. And open and closed systems, they are completely different. So in principle, there's only one truly closed system, and that is the whole of the universe, the whole of reality. It has no in and outflows, because if it would have in and outflows, we would count that as part of reality, part of the universe. And there is no information exchange with the outside. That's more or less the same. But all the systems, apart from the whole of reality that we define, are always open. And they are intimately and essentially embedded in an environment. And they are subject to all kinds of uncontrollable environmental influences. And effectively, they have an infinite number of possible states in which they can be. But we can define a closed system as an approximation. So every closed system is actually an open system, but we can approximate it by saying, or something like, suppose only these in and outputs. And that approximation needs to be maintained. In order to have a closed system, you need to control the environment in some way. And when you do it, then the characteristic dynamics or properties, they become much more constrained, because they're not perturbed by all kinds of weird, uncontrollable influences. That's what you control for. And it also leads that it becomes finite, because it is now not part of the whole of the universe, but it is separated from the whole of the universe. And therefore we end up with a finite, effectively finite set of states that in principle can be fully knowable, and therefore much more predictable than an open system. So let's go to the picture again. We have a closed system, which apart from the universe doesn't really exist, and we have open systems. But the closed system needs to be separated from its environment in order to be an effectively closed system. So that protection from the environment, that is this blue circle around it. And that is the reason why the context can be accounted for. The whole system now is decoupled by an action from the rest of the universe. Another question that is actually strongly associated is the question, what is a living agent? And a living agent is actually just an organism, and often I will call it an agent. And there is a precise definition as a very special closed system. A living agent is an autonomous organization system that adaptively regulates its coupling with its environment and contributes to sustaining itself as a consequence. So basically, a living agent regulates its coupling with its environment, like that blue circle that I drew. And in doing so, it contributes to sustaining itself as a consequence, to making itself in its own existence more predictable as a consequence. That is this definition from Di Paolo and Barandiara. Let's put that in this picture again. So now we are looking at an agent as our system. And what now is the agency and the fact that makes it a living agent, and that is that this coupling, all its connections with the outside world, they are now under control of the agent. So it can correct for all kinds of inputs, and it can sense the world via the inputs, but it can influence the world via its outputs. And because all its relationships with its context, with its environment, are now under control, we actually have a safe environment for self-maintenance. So the agent can now maintain itself and have a lot of control over its own development. And that separates and distances the agent from its environment. Without this, it would be part of the environment, and the moment it dies, it is not able to do this any longer, and then it becomes again part of the environment and becomes just a normal system, and it stops being a living agent. So this leads to a number of key concepts of enactive cognition, and another way of enactive cognition is saying it is being by doing. So let's go into a number of concepts. Well, an agent persists for some time through its own doing, so it is being by doing. It changes slowly, or it has stabilizing behaviors. And a behavior is an activity initiated by and in the service of the agent. And its behaviors allow it to be robust to perturbations of all kinds. So the environment will still do all kinds of things, but its behaviors allow an agent to discount for them. So, and that allow it to adapt to its habitat. And it also influences its habitat. Then an agent represents a set of characteristics, behaviors, and that set is called an identity. And this makes it resilient. And resilient means it can maintain its identity under perturbation while retaining essentially the same functions, structures, and feedbacks. This is a standard definition of resilience. And that makes identity the set of habits and skills that promote self-perpetuation. So an agent perpetuates and extends itself by, well, enacting its identity and through learning. And learning is a balance between stability, so maintaining a stable organization of your identity and your skills, and plasticity, being able to adapt to novelty in an external environment. So it's always change versus remaining the same that are fighting and trying to find the optimal balance in the service of the agent. And then there's a last thing. Every agent leaves traces in the environment. It takes from the environment, so it leaves a whole, say, but it also gives something to the environment via its excrements or its structures that it's built or whatever. And it can have a positive effect, and then it improves the viability of the environment, or it can have a negative effect in which the viability of the whole environment is degraded, and it's much more difficult to live in a degraded environment. So going back to our picture here, we have an agent again in a slightly degraded environment, but if the agent actually has a positive effect, then it will improve its environment so that the environment actually promotes its own viability, but also the viability for other agents of the same type or maybe completely different agents. So now we have had a number of key concepts of enactive cognition, of being by doing. Yeah, so we have behaviors, that is all the things that the agent does in relationship to its environments. We have an identity. Identity is a set of all the skills and the strategies of the agent that it uses in the service of remaining itself, and that is also the resilience. We have learning. The environment can change, so it has to be both stable and it has to adapt to the environment, learn new things, but still remain its own identity and resilience. And then there is stigmergy, and stigmergy is leaving traces in the environment that you can later build on. At least would be positive stigmergy. You can also have negative stigmergy, that would be degrading the environment, so that if you later visit it, it's only a worse environment. But the key point is that all living agents are a self-maintained closed system. Of course, they're not really closed, they are closed because of their own doing, by controlling the interface between themselves and the environment. The next topic is revisiting intelligence and wisdom again. And let's go to the previous session, in which we had 4 different modes that emerged from problem prevention and problem solving. Problem prevention associated with wisdom, problem solving associated with intelligence, and the opposite of intelligence is not solving the problem. So allowing the situation to persist, acceptance, adapting to that situation. And we can have different modes in this situation. So in this quadrant here, it is typically problem prevention, and you're not very self-assertive. Or in this quadrant, you can deal with problems and you be very self-assertive. So let's look at a number of properties and oppositions between wisdom and intelligence. So intelligence developed for pressing problem solving. It is about realizing intended outcomes of a specific kind, namely solutions to the problems. While wisdom is for pressing problem prevention, and it is about realizing broadly benign and supportive environments and habitats. And if you do that, then the chance of ever getting into trouble is much lower. So that is the key point. The measure of success of intelligence is, of course, solved problems. And solved problems leads to the deactivation of intelligence. If you don't have a problem, you don't need to be assertive, intelligent. The measure of success of wisdom is the prevention of problems, and that means the continued activation of wisdom. And so success for intelligence is deactivation, success for wisdom is continued activation. The measure of failure is for intelligence unsolved or new problems, and that means the continued activation of intelligence. So the more you have to activate your intelligence, the more it is, weirdly enough, a sign of failure. The measure of failure for the wisdom mode is that you end up impressing problems and hence have to activate your intelligence. So intelligence and wisdom are quite different beasts. And they of course are all in the service of avoiding the end of the agent, death. But it is clear that wisdom is actually the default mode because it is furthest from death. It is our default mode in which the urgency to do something is rather low. It is very broadly aimed. You don't know which problems yet you have to prevent, so prevent pretty much everything. And the cost of failure is fairly low because you always have the fallback mode of the intelligent strategies. But now the urgency is high and it is very targeted. It is targeted as solving a problem, getting out of here, getting out from this area and going back to that area. So, but if you fail, and the cost of failure is high because you might die or harm yourself or something like that. So this is very much about predictability, getting out of here, and this is about broad benefits. So that leads to different closed and open system approximation. So a closed system is much more predictable because we have accounted for all kinds of environmental influences that no longer play a role. And that means that we are talking about control of the environment by the agent. And but that allows realizing intended outcomes. And this whole process then closes the system, control of the environment. In the case of an open system, there is no control of the environment. So the only thing that you can do is rely on the innate dynamics of whatever is happening in the environment. So you're not controlling anything. You're just allowing everything to happen, and you are actually allowing it to realize its full potential. Because if it is realizing its full potential, it is doing whatever it wants to do, and it is not problematic. At least it doesn't interpret its own situation as problematic. Yeah. So the broad benefits is about realizing a world in which there is no problem, because everyone and everything is doing whatever it wants to do, and it is not interpreted as a problem. So let's put that in our squares again. Now we have control of the environment, realizing intended outcomes, reliance on innate dynamic, and realizing full potential. And these words actually correspond to important key concepts of politics. Let's look at this one. Control of the environment is typically is authority. And we define it as the capacity to create, maintain, and influence habitats. Realizing intended outcomes is power. Russell, in 1938, defined power as the ability to realize intended outcomes, literally. So that's the reason why I use it here. Reliance on innate dynamics means freedom. And the Oxford Dictionary says the power or right to act, speak, or think as one wants without hindrance or restraint. So that is the opposite of control. Realizing one's full potential, we also have a name for that, that is self-actualization. And self-actualization is defined as the realization or fulfillment of one's talents and potentialities, especially considered as a drive or need present in everyone. So this already suggests this definition, that it is something that is innate, it is normal for everyone, and it is, I think it's part of core cognition. So all of life does this self-actualization, open-ended development of self. And so here is that link with core cognition, and the next step is a link with motivation. With reasons to do things. And now I defined power, I changed it into powerless, which basically means subject to power. If you're subject to power, you have few options, and you have an external motivation. Whatever you do is authority enforced by fear of punishment, for rule compliance, something like that. You feel you have no options because you are powerless, you're subject to the power of something else. In this quadrant here, we have the introjected motivation, and that is an internal or esteem-based pressure to avoid harm. So basically you do stuff here because if you don't do them, you end up with a worse or a harmful effect. So people might not take you seriously. Everyone might know that you make mistakes, so better do it well. Yeah, or you work not because you like it, but because then you get money and you can spend it on things that you like. Yeah, so that is the introjected motivation, and in which you subject yourself to the authority, typically of others. For self-actualization, we have another motivation, the identified motivation. Which is about personal importances or integrated personal goals that then motivate you to develop yourself. And motivation associated with freedom are intrinsic motivation, which is a completely self-determined activity. So these are the definitions of Ryan and Dicey that I used here, and they fit perfectly, I would say, in this picture. So now get to a next issue, that are basic strategies associated with closed and open systems. And let's first go to the closed systems. Closed systems are for problem solving. And problem solving, it works something like this. If you have a pressing problem, then do everything to solve it. It is a high urgency for an agent if it has a problematic situation. So it must do something. So to do everything to solve it, what does it mean? Well, it means that if one condition is realized and another condition and maybe many more other conditions are realized, then the environment, the system, the situation, a problematic thing or whatever does whatever you want to do. And that is the intended outcome. And that leads to closing the system. Here you don't allow the full freedom of the world or another system or the environment or whatever you have to solve or control. You have to ensure that you quarantine it and that you disconnect it from its environment so that you make its output completely predictable and like the intended outcome. So you close the system, you are authoritative, you change the world, you exercise, you assert yourself in the world. It is an exercise of power and it is a high motivation thing because it is a pressing problem that makes that raises the motivation. For problem prevention, that is a completely different strategy. So here we have a world of different agents, mostly happy, a few not so happy, and some of these could use help or attention. So what you do in this situation is typically you want to end up in a situation with fewer individuals that need help or attention. And you do that by countless, almost effortless micro-interventions. So everyone in this world who can easily help, helps this one, helps this one, helps this one, etc. And the end result is that everyone has been helped and now we have more people in a happy, problemless state. So these the key here is what you could call Wu Wei. That's a Taoist term from Chinese, more than 2,000 years old. And it means something like effortless action. But it is pervasive optimization. It is, well, like I said, countless effortless micro-interventions that almost feel as if you're not doing anything. But in fact, if we all do it, it is super, super effective. So we can apply this to two completely different things, bureaucracy and friendship. And in bureaucracy, then if condition 1 is realized, filling in one form. If condition 2 is realized, you're there at the proper time. If condition n realized, you've signed the paper, etc., then you get help. And this is a typical example of a closed system that is now an office, and it gets controlled input, the form, etc., and then it gets a predictable output, some form of help or money at a bank account or something like that. A friendship doesn't work like this. It works anytime, any form, whatever you need, via Wu Wei, effortless action. You simply have fun together, you drink a beer, you talk about a problem, and that is actually enough in most cases, or you help someone with moving or cleaning or whatever. And the friendship thing you can do in without problems. At the moment, friendship is influenced by very serious problems of one or more people, then it is really tasked and maybe even can break. So why do bureaucracy and friendship make the world and the future predictable? Well, bureaucracy tries to reduce all options of everything going wrong and tries to be in full control. But a friendship helps to prevent all kinds of problems, and everyone helps within a friendship. And so the future in both cases, successfully executed, is a future without problems. But one is specified, this problem is gone, that's the bureaucracy type of thing, while the friendship type is, well, continuing in preventing problems. So let's go to the question a bit more, why is the future predictable? And I separate the coping mode on the left and the co-creation mode on the right, and it has characteristic strategies. So the coping mode is tries to reduce options and try to be in full control, reduce options for things going wrong, and the co-creation mode is where all help to prevent problems. The problem prevention is not very high on the coping mode. Why? Because it's focused on solving problems and not on being aware of all kinds of little problems that might pop up. On the co-creation mode side, problem prevention is high, it is the central. Problem solving is different. So in the coping mode, it is focused at different pressing problems, and it may go at high costs. So if necessary, you have to make the cost in order to solve your problem. In the co-creation mode, we typically solve all the easy ones very easily, almost effortlessly, at low cost to ourselves, but at great benefit for the whole. And key terms here are, in the coping mode, intelligence, power and control, to ensure that the options eventually reduce to only the options that solve problems. And the key terms on the co-creation mode side are wisdom, pervasive optimization, everyone contributes a little bit, and that why as a counterpart for control. So let's connect that to the value field that we have with the coping mode now on the left here, and the co-creation mode on the right. These are more problem and related, problem-solving related things where there must be a problem, and this is much more in preventing problems. And then we can easily put bureaucracy here. If you look, bureaucracy, what do you need? Well, you need to be competent, ambitious, well, intelligent here, successful. That is what lower level workers in a bureaucracy have to do. Higher level workers are influential, they have authority, probably wealthy, and a lot of social power. Here we have friendship, in which it is important to be loyal, responsible, help each other, to be honest and forgiving, to create a world of peace, have social justice, inner harmony and equality, all within these all define typical friendship properties, and they are opposites of each other. So, looking back, so what? Why is this interesting and useful? Well, this lecture gave you two organizational principles that really structure reality, and the more you learn to see them, the more powerful they are going to be. They are the open and closed system strategies, like exemplified today in friendship versus bureaucracy, but they are everywhere. And we talked about the origin of political concepts without referring to humans at all. We just referred to agents in general, but still we were able to define power, authority, freedom, pervasive optimization, motivations. We do things all the time because of motivations. Being aware of why you do what you do is a really important little thing. And we laid the basis for two modes of thought. One associated with an open environment and one with a closed environment. And this is a picture from Ian McGilchrist, in which the right hemisphere is typically for sustained, broad, open attention. It allows you to be vigilant and alert, while the left hemisphere is about being narrow, sharply focused attention to details, and that allows you to solve the problems and focus yourself on the problem. Well, the graphic summary for today looks like this. Our example was bureaucracy and friendship. Sustainability issue is that coping is a fallback for co-creation. And that is actually a pretty important little conclusion. And maybe for sustainability issues, we shouldn't cope so much. Then development, individual development, self-actualization and freedom. For thinking further, we went further into the difference between intelligence and wisdom. Feelings went into the structure of motivation. Then the oppositions were mainly coping versus co-creation, but also control versus pervasive optimization and a number of others. Our quadrants today was the quadrant with the four key concepts of politics. Systems idea was about perpetuation and predictability of systems, and then especially living systems, and the concepts were resilience, identity, behavior, authority, power, freedom, self-actualization, why, and some more. These are the references of today, and then I hope to see you at the next session where we go into the two modes in more and greater detail.